She was left pregnant and alone. Then she showed something in court he never expected. The day of the wedding was like a scene pulled straight from a romantic movie. Beneath a canopy of soft white fabric and strings of golden fairy lights, a couple stood hand in hand, exchanging vows that brought many to tears. He looked into her eyes with what seemed like genuine adoration, promising to stand by her side in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. She believed every word, her heart full of hope, unaware that the man standing before her was skilled in speaking beautifully but lacked the conviction to stand by anything he said. Their families cheered as they kissed, and the crowd applauded, but what no one could see was that their foundation was already riddled with cracks, subtle at first, but growing deeper each day. They moved into a modest home shortly after the wedding, a 2-bedroom townhouse she decorated with love and anticipation of their life together. He worked late hours, always claiming it was for their future, while she cooked, cleaned, and created a life around the idea of family. Conversations about children were frequent in the beginning. He said he wanted to be a father by the time he turned 30. She smiled at the thought, already imagining tiny socks, a crib, and bedtime lullabies. But soon, those conversations became one-sided. He grew distant. When she would bring it up, he would nod vaguely and then change the subject to sports, work, or his phone. The warmth he once radiated turned cold, but she kept believing he was simply tired. Love, after all, was about patience. The day she saw the 2 faint lines on the pregnancy test, her hands trembled. Her knees weakened, and she had to sit down on the bathroom floor, overcome with emotion. For her, this was the happiest moment of her life, confirmation that her dream of becoming a mother was coming true. She waited for him to return home from work that night, unable to contain her excitement. She rehearsed how she would tell him, even prepared a tiny box with a pacifier and the test inside. When he walked through the door, she greeted him with a warm smile and asked him to sit down. He opened the box, stared blankly for a moment, and then let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You're serious?" he said, his tone flat, almost accusing. She blinked, confused. "I thought you'd be happy," she said, voice shaking. He stood up, pacing the living room, avoiding her eyes. "You couldn't wait, could you? You had to go and ruin everything." Her heart dropped. Ruin? She tried to reason with him, reminding him of their past talks about having children. But he was unreachable, withdrawn. That night, he slept on the couch and left early the next morning. What was supposed to be a celebration turned into silence. She sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched breakfast she'd made, trying to make sense of how love could turn into this so suddenly. Over the next few weeks, things didn't improve. He stopped coming home some nights, always blaming work. But she found unfamiliar perfume on his shirt and unread messages popping up on his phone with names she didn't recognize. She didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious one who snoops, but the growing emptiness in their house and the cold glances he gave her started to consume her. One night, she stood outside their bedroom door and heard him on a call. His voice was low but sharp. "She thinks this baby changes everything. She doesn't know I'm done." Her heart cracked, a quiet, internal shatter that made her press a hand to her stomach, instinctively protective. When he noticed her in the doorway, he didn't flinch. "Eavesdropping now?" he said, brushing past her without a word of apology. Later that night, she confronted him, asking for honesty. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked, barely able to get the words out. He scoffed. "You think I want to be tied to a crying baby and a miserable housewife? You trapped me." That accusation felt like a knife. Trapped? This life they built together, the child growing inside her, was once something they dreamed of. At least, she thought they had. He slammed the door behind him as he left, and she stood in the hallway, surrounded by silence, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Days passed without a word from him. She messaged, called, and even reached out to one of his coworkers to make sure he was safe. Eventually, he came back, only to gather clothes and mutter that he needed space. She followed him out to the car, tears streaming down her face, trying to make him understand. "Please, don't do this. I need you. The baby needs you." But his only response was venomous. "That baby isn't mine. You probably planned this to keep me from leaving." She stood frozen as he drove off, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was like her entire world had cracked open at her feet. That night, she stared at the ultrasound photo resting on her nightstand, the faint heartbeat she had seen earlier that week echoing in her memory. How could something so pure, so beautiful, be seen as a burden by the man who once claimed to love her? She didn't sleep. The next morning, she called her OB/GYN and scheduled an appointment on her own. The nurse smiled kindly as she adjusted the gel on her belly, and when the monitor showed the small flutter of a heartbeat, tears rolled down her cheeks, not from fear, but from love. Even if he chose to walk away, she wouldn't. She would love this child enough for both of them. When she returned home from that appointment, the apartment was emptier than before. Half the closet was cleared. The drawers he used to keep his watches and cologne were left open and bare. A note lay on the kitchen counter, hastily scribbled, "Don't contact me. Handle things however you want." There was no signature, no goodbye. Just an absence so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her chest. She sat on the living room floor, the same place where they had once danced barefoot after dinner, and let the grief flood through her. She wasn't just mourning the man, she was mourning the life they had planned, the promises they made, and the future that had collapsed overnight. With no job, no family nearby, and no partner to lean on, she began to feel the full weight of abandonment. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her insurance only covered part of her prenatal visits. Still, every time she touched her belly, she remembered what she was fighting for. With trembling hands, she posted her resume online again, this time under a new section, willing to do remote, part-time, or freelance work. She wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and told herself, this child would be raised in love, even if that love came from one person alone. What she didn't know then was that her journey was only beginning, and so was her strength. She always believed true friendship showed itself in hard times. But as soon as word spread that she was pregnant and alone, the text messages stopped. The friends who once invited her for coffee, dinners, or movie nights became distant, politely too busy or simply never responding. Even her maid of honor from the wedding sent a cold message, "Sorry to hear what happened. I hope things work out. I just can't take sides." That line stung. It wasn't about sides, it was about showing up. But when it truly mattered, no one did. She began to understand that her social life had always been attached to him. The invitations, the celebrations, the attention, it had been a reflection of his charm, not her worth. Alone in her silence, she sat through long nights with her swollen feet propped up on the couch, scrolling through old photos of friendships that once felt permanent. Her phone, once full of conversations and laughter, now felt like a reminder of everyone who had chosen comfort over loyalty. Each unanswered message carved the lesson deeper: some people only love you when you're easy to love. At her next prenatal appointment, the doctor furrowed her brow while reviewing the sonogram. "You need to reduce your stress levels," she said gently. "And you need rest. Working too much, Worrying too much, none of that is good for the baby." The words landed like a warning shot. But how could she rest when everything depended on her? The bills didn't pause. The eviction notice taped to the door didn't vanish. And yet, her body was telling her to slow down, that her child's life now hung in the balance of her decisions. She left the clinic that day feeling overwhelmed. Her legs ached from walking, and her chest tightened from the pressure of carrying too much alone. That night, after a simple dinner of rice and beans, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the ceiling. She had never been one to pray often, but in that moment, she whispered a quiet plea for strength. She didn't ask for miracles, only enough strength to carry her through another day, and for her baby to keep growing safely despite the chaos swirling around them both. Just past midnight, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. She startled awake, heart racing. When she opened the door, a stern-faced man handed her a large envelope. "You've been served," he said, before walking away without another word. Inside the envelope was a summons. Her ex-husband had filed for divorce. But worse than the papers was the claim inside. He denied paternity and accused her of deception with intent to obtain financial gain. It was humiliating to read, as if the man who once whispered dreams into her ear now painted her as a schemer. Tears welled up, but this time she didn't cry. She sat quietly, letting the silence press against her. He wasn't just trying to leave, he was trying to erase his existence in the child's life completely. The betrayal burned differently now. It wasn't just emotional, it was legal, public, and calculated. He wanted to discard not just her, but their unborn child, as if neither ever mattered. And for the first time since he walked away, something inside her shifted. She stopped hoping for his return. She started thinking about how to fight back. With nowhere else to turn, she decided to visit his parents. Perhaps they could talk sense into him or at least provide some support. She traveled across town by bus, her belly now showing beneath her oversized coat. When his mother opened the door and saw her, her expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. The woman who once toasted to their love at the wedding now glared at her like a stranger. "I need to talk," she said. "Please, just a moment." But the older woman shook her head. "My son told us everything. He said the baby isn't his." Stunned, she tried to explain, tried to plead for understanding. "You know your son. You know we were trying for a baby. But it didn't matter." His mother dismissed her with a sharp wave. "Leave before I call someone. You're not welcome here anymore." The door closed hard in her face. She stood on the porch in the cold, fists clenched, tears frozen to her cheeks. Whatever hope she held for familial support had shattered completely. She was truly alone now, yet with every door slammed in her face, something inside her grew more solid. Grief was turning to resolve. Back home, she sat on the floor assembling a second-hand crib she found on a local app for cheap. The instructions were faded, and a few screws were missing, but she made do, determined that her child would not feel the absence of a father in the warmth of their first bed. She worked slowly, her body sore, back aching, but her hands steady. The sound of the electric drill was the only noise in the apartment. Each turn of the screw felt like a quiet rebellion. She would create a safe space with her own hands, with or without him. Later that evening, she opened the manila envelope again and looked at the court date. It was 3 weeks away. Enough time to gather what little evidence she had: appointment logs, ultrasound photos, saved messages, and maybe, just maybe, a witness. She wasn't a lawyer, and she couldn't afford one, but she would walk into that courtroom with her head held high. He wanted to humiliate her in front of a judge. But she wasn't going there to beg for his presence. She was going to defend her truth and her child's right to exist without shame. The day of the hearing arrived with gray clouds hanging low in the sky. She stood outside the courthouse in a simple black dress that no longer fit right, her belly gently rounded beneath it. Inside, the air felt colder than outside. Her ex-husband entered the courtroom in a sharp navy suit, polished shoes clicking confidently across the floor. At his side was a woman she had never seen before, tall, flawless, and clearly expensive. His new partner. The two of them shared a quiet laugh, as if this whole ordeal was beneath them. When the judge entered, everyone rose. She clutched her hands tightly in front of her stomach, praying her voice wouldn't tremble when she had to speak. The lawyer her ex-husband brought was aggressive, immediately painting her as manipulative and unstable. "There is no proof this child is his," he said, without hesitation. She stared straight ahead, refusing to shrink. Let them say what they wanted, she had lived every moment of this pregnancy alone, and that truth could not be erased by performance or suits. The opposing lawyer leaned into his performance. "Your Honor," he said, raising a brow dramatically, "this woman has no evidence beyond her own word. She had access to countless men. My client was deceived, coerced, and ultimately used." Gasps came from a few in the audience. She felt her face flush, not from shame, but from the fury of being reduced to a stereotype. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but unwavering. "I never lied. He was with me when I found out." He celebrated, at first. She handed the judge copies of her ultrasound reports, appointment confirmations, and a copy of a text she had taken a screenshot of, one where he wrote, "Can't believe I'm going to be a dad." The judge glanced through them without expression. Her ex, meanwhile, scoffed. "She forged all that. You know how people get when they're desperate." His words stung, not because they carried truth, but because they were delivered with the ease of someone who had rehearsed their cruelty. The judge remained composed, his face unreadable as he adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Ms. Carson," he said, using her last name formally, "do you have anyone here to testify on your behalf?" Her heart sank. She shook her head slowly. No friends, no family had come. Just her. The silence in the room felt oppressive. The other side smirked as if victory was near. But the judge surprised them all. "We will schedule a follow-up session pending a motion for DNA testing. Until then, no decision will be made on child support or paternity." Relief flooded her body like a sudden breath of air. She hadn't known if a court would even consider her side, let alone propose a test. Her ex's lawyer rose quickly. "Your Honor, that would delay matters unnecessarily." The judge raised a hand. "The court finds the mother's documentation compelling enough to warrant a proper test. We do not gamble with a child's identity." Her ex's face twitched. It was the first time she'd seen him lose composure. And it wouldn't be the last. She walked out of the courthouse slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside, her ex confronted her in the parking lot. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You're really dragging this out? I've moved on. Just disappear already." She stared at him, feeling nothing. No fear, no longing, just a calm, hard line between them. "You left. But you don't get to rewrite what happened," she replied. His girlfriend snorted from behind him. "Let's go. She's pathetic." The words bounced off her like paper thrown at stone. Later that night, she lay in bed replaying the scene. Not the insults, but the judge's eyes. The way he watched her, trying to decide if she was telling the truth. And in that moment, she realized she didn't care whether her ex believed her or not. What mattered was the truth, her baby's truth. She pulled the small ultrasound photo from the drawer next to her bed and whispered, "No matter what happens, I will never let anyone treat you like a mistake." That promise steadied her more than any court order ever could. The following day, she opened an old box tucked in her closet, one she hadn't dared look at in months. Inside were notes, photos, small tokens of a life that now felt like someone else's. Among them was a letter, one he wrote months before she got pregnant. In it, he wrote about how he wanted children, how he couldn't wait to be a father, how he knew she'd be an amazing mother. The words were in his handwriting, raw and unfiltered. She stared at the paper, anger burning beneath her skin. She remembered the day he gave it to her. It was after a trip to the lake, when he said they were finally ready to start trying. The memory played back in full color, his arms around her, his voice full of hope. Now, it felt like a performance, a scene in a play meant to win applause. But this letter, this piece of truth, hadn't been written for a courtroom, it had been written in a moment of vulnerability. And maybe, just maybe, it could now become her proof. She carefully placed it in a folder labeled simply, "Truth." At the next court session, she noticed a woman sitting quietly in the back row. She had sharp eyes and carried a leather folder on her lap, watching every moment with quiet intensity. While others seemed detached or curious, this woman watched with focus, as if she knew something. When the session ended and people began leaving, the woman approached slowly. "You don't know me," she said. "But I know your ex-husband very well. I was once in your shoes." The words sent a chill down her spine. The woman handed her a card before walking away. "Call me if you want to know the truth," she said softly. Later that night, she sat on her bed staring at the card. Curiosity wrestled with caution. Who was this woman? And what did she mean by "once in your shoes"? Her gut told her this was no coincidence. With a deep breath, she picked up the phone and dialed. They met at a cafe near the courthouse 2 days later. The woman's name was Denise. Over tea, she unfolded a story disturbingly familiar, another relationship, full of charm, promises, and then abandonment. Denise had also been discarded when she became pregnant, though she had miscarried from the stress before she could go to court. "He did this before?" she asked, her heart sinking. Denise nodded. "Exactly the same pattern. He runs, lies, and then rewrites the story to protect himself." Denise placed a USB stick on the table. "This has emails, messages, voice recordings, things I saved because I couldn't let it happen to someone else. I never had the courage to take it further, but maybe you can." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the USB. It was like being handed a lifeline in the middle of a storm. For the first time, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every woman he had tried to erase. A week later, she received a call from the court. The DNA test would be conducted within 5 days. The news filled her with anxiety, but also a strange calm. She wasn't afraid of the result, she knew the truth. What terrified her was whether it would be enough to matter. That night, she gathered everything she had: appointment logs, the ultrasound timeline, the letter he wrote, and now, Denise's evidence. Piece by piece, she was building her case not just with facts, but with undeniable patterns. She emailed the court clerk requesting permission to submit additional documentation from a third party with prior experience with her ex. It was a long shot. Courts didn't always allow character evidence in civil hearings. But she was determined. Her baby deserved to grow up in a world where lies didn't go unchallenged. And if the system worked as it should, the truth was about to roar louder than any accusation. That night, as she reviewed old files on her computer, she stumbled across an audio file she had completely forgotten. It was from the day they found out she was pregnant. His voice echoed through the speakers. "We're really doing this, huh?" he said. "I can't believe I'm going to be a dad." Her breath caught in her throat. In the recording, they laughed. He spoke of baby names. He even mentioned saving money for a crib. It was irrefutable. It wasn't just about biology anymore. He had acknowledged the pregnancy, willingly, lovingly, before things fell apart. She transferred the file to a flash drive and added it to her growing evidence folder. That audio, captured in a time when hope still lived between them, would now speak volumes in court. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't edited. It was raw, spontaneous truth, straight from his own mouth. And with every step, she felt herself becoming less a victim of his lies and more the voice of the truth he had tried so hard to bury. When the second hearing began, the courtroom felt different. This time, she stood taller. Her file of evidence rested calmly in her hands, while her ex looked increasingly agitated. The judge began with the DNA results. Paternity is confirmed. Mr. Dalton is the biological father. A wave of emotion swept over her, but she kept her expression steady. Her ex shifted in his seat, the mask of control beginning to crack. But she didn't stop there. With the judge's permission, she submitted Denise's records, her own audio file, and the letter. The opposing lawyer stammered, requesting a recess. The judge denied it. "This court will not be manipulated," he said firmly. Her ex's smugness drained with every passing second. And she, once trembling and unheard, now stood firm, letting the facts speak for what his charm never could. This was no longer a case of opinion. It was a reckoning. His lawyer's face tensed as the audio file played. The judge listened without interruption, eyes fixed on the screen while the courtroom remained in complete silence. Her ex's voice filled the room, laughter, baby name ideas, and tender promises. When it ended, no one spoke. Then came the outburst. "This is being taken out of context," he shouted, standing abruptly. "This whole thing is a setup." But the judge remained calm, unmoved. "It sounds like a genuine recording of anticipation and consent," he said flatly. The lawyer tried to object, fumbling through legal jargon, but it was too late. The tide had shifted. The judge ordered the evidence to be entered into the record. She sat quietly, not smiling, not triumphant, just relieved. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And it was finally catching up to him. She looked at her folded hands resting gently on her belly, feeling her child kick as if acknowledging the moment too. After reviewing the documents, audio files, and submitted testimonies, the judge called for a short recess before giving his verdict. The room emptied slowly, murmurs of disbelief and shifting loyalties among the observers. Outside the courtroom, her ex sat on a bench with his new partner, their whispers sharp and hurried. She remained in the hall, leaning against the cold wall, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The weight of the past months hung on her shoulders, but for the first time, it no longer crushed her. When the judge returned, he wasted no time. This court finds the mother credible and consistent. The father not only attempted to deny paternity, but acted in bad faith to evade responsibility. This court does not tolerate deception or abandonment of duty. Her ex shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time looked unsure of himself. The verdict was approaching, and for him, so was accountability. The final ruling came swift and clear. Paternity was officially confirmed, child support was granted, and a penalty for false statements was imposed. He would be required to pay not only retroactive support but also legal fees, despite trying to delay the case. The judge emphasized the emotional and financial hardship inflicted on the mother during her pregnancy, caused by intentional avoidance. Her ex tried to protest again, but the judge silenced him with a stern glance. "You made choices. Now you face their consequences." As she exited the courtroom, the bailiff nodded at her respectfully. Outside, the sky had cleared, and the cold air carried a new kind of stillness. She didn't feel victorious, she felt free. Free from his shadow, free from shame, free to build her child's future without the weight of silence. The courthouse doors closed behind her like the final page of a chapter that had tried to destroy her. But she hadn't broken. She had rewritten the ending. 2 days later, she received a call from his lawyer. He wanted to meet privately. Curiosity got the better of her, and she agreed, under the condition that it was in public. They met at a quiet corner of a local cafe. He looked tired, his once slick hair now unkempt, eyes hollow. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said, barely able to look at her. "I thought I could walk away without consequence. That maybe you'd just disappear." His voice cracked with something close to regret. She didn't respond. She didn't owe him forgiveness. But he continued. "I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father. I panicked. And when things started falling apart, I lied to make myself feel in control again." She listened silently. Then she stood up. "You didn't just lie to me. You tried to erase your own child. That's not fear. That's cowardice." With that, she left. No yelling, no drama, just truth. And this time, it echoed louder than any courtroom ever could. A week later, the court allowed her to deliver a closing statement to be added to the official record, something she requested herself. She stood in front of the same judge, holding a piece of paper in her hand, but she didn't read it. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "I came here afraid, alone, and uncertain if anyone would believe me. But I learned that truth needs no performance. It just needs time and courage." Her voice didn't tremble once. She glanced at her child's ultrasound photo placed in her purse, right where it always stayed. She continued, "I don't seek pity. I don't even seek an apology. I stand here not just as a woman who was abandoned, but as a mother who refused to be silenced. For every woman watching, doubting her worth because of a man's cruelty, I hope she finds her voice. I found mine here, in this place of judgment. And now I walk away, not broken, but whole." The room was quiet. Even the judge seemed moved. The court clerk nodded gently as she stepped down. A moment of quiet dignity, carved into history. The day the final documents arrived, she sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope unopened before her. The sound of her breathing filled the quiet room, interrupted only by the soft ticking of the wall clock. When she finally broke the seal, the weight of months lifted in one swift movement. It was all there: legal recognition, financial support, acknowledgement of her child's paternity, and the court's official condemnation of his deceit. The system hadn't failed her after all. It had taken time, but it had listened. As she ran her fingers across the printed words, she felt something shift inside her, not relief, not vindication, but peace. Her name was no longer bound to his lies. Her child's future no longer floated in uncertainty. She placed the documents in a file labeled simply proof and slid it into a drawer. Her life was no longer defined by proving anything to anyone. It was about building forward, step by step, day by day, in truth. Among those who watched her deliver her closing statement in court had been a young attorney named Marissa. After the final hearing, Marissa approached her in the hallway with sincerity. "You spoke with more strength than most trained litigators," she said. "I don't know if anyone's told you this, but you have a voice that could help people." The idea felt foreign at first. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't trained for public speaking. She was just someone who survived. But Marissa wasn't just offering praise, she was offering a partnership. "I run a legal resource center for single mothers who can't afford representation. I could use someone like you, someone who's lived it. Someone who understands the silence." It didn't take long for her to say yes. She wouldn't just rebuild her life, she'd help others do the same. And in that quiet hallway, what had once been a story of abandonment began transforming into a mission of purpose. Months later, in the early hours of a cold morning, her labor began. The hospital room was quiet, the city still sleeping beyond the window. There was no one holding her hand, no partner pacing the hallway, but she didn't feel alone. A kind nurse stood beside her, eyes warm, and said, "You're doing great. You're almost there." With one final push, the room filled with the sharp, miraculous cry of new life. Her baby had arrived, small, pink, and perfect. Tears rolled down her cheeks as they placed the child in her arms. She whispered the name she had chosen long before all the chaos began, a name that carried both softness and strength. "Welcome," she said, pressing a kiss to the tiny forehead. In that moment, the months of courtrooms, isolation, and pain vanished, replaced by a quiet, overwhelming joy. This was what it had all been for. Every sleepless night. Every unanswered call. Every step forward through fear. 3 weeks after the birth, she was rocking her baby to sleep when a knock echoed at her door. She opened it slowly, surprised to see her former mother-in-law standing there, eyes red and shoulders slumped. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. There was no arrogance now, only remorse. They sat in silence at first, the baby sleeping in her arms. Then came the whispered apology. "I was wrong. I let him tell me what to believe. I should have seen the truth in your eyes." She didn't know how to respond. She hadn't expected an apology, had stopped needing one long ago. Still, she listened, calm and steady. The older woman asked softly, "May I see him?" With hesitation, she allowed it. The grandmother held the child gently, tears falling freely. "I know I can't undo what I said. But I hope someday he'll know I came back." She nodded slowly. Not out of acceptance, but out of understanding. Everyone had their own journey toward truth, even the ones who had turned away. 1 year later, her life looked nothing like the ruins it once was. She now worked part-time at the legal center with Marissa, speaking at seminars and helping other women navigate the same shadows she had once walked alone. Her child was thriving, full of laughter and wide-eyed wonder. Their small apartment was still modest, but it overflowed with warmth. She had created something beautiful not from what she was given, but from what she refused to give up. She often thought back to that courtroom, the silence, the stares, the weight of doubt. But now, when she looked at her life, she didn't see a woman who had been humiliated. She saw a woman who had risen. A woman who had fought for her voice. A woman who, in the face of abandonment, had chosen courage. And when her child asked one day about the past, she would tell the truth, not the version written by fear, but the one born of resilience. Because in the end, truth always finds its way to light.